What's up, everybody? It's your man, Donovan Sharpe, coming to you live from Philadelphia once again with this episode of the Sharpe Reality. I was out here last month for Thanksgiving, and I am out here again for Christmas to visit some family and friends. So, hope all of you guys had as good a Christmas as I did. As always, be sure to follow me on Twitter at Donovan_Sharpe, like my Facebook page, The Sharpe Reality. Definitely check out previous podcast episodes on thesharpereality.com. And again, also make sure you check out my articles on Return of Kings. I've got over 80 articles there. I've been writing for the site now for almost 3 years. And I cover everything imaginable with regards to game. I talk about game, I talk about girls, I talk about fitness. I give my personal stories on relationships, failures with women, slut tells, different kinds of sluts, how to be better with finances, anything you can think of. I've covered over that 3-year span as a Return of Kings contributor. Also subscribe to my YouTube channel. Just do a search. Go to youtube.com. Do a search for either Donovan Sharpe or The Sharpe Reality, and you'll find all of my podcast episodes there as well. Well, a while back, I did a podcast on the worst heartbreak of my life, and I talked about the relationship that did by far and away the most damage financially as well as emotionally. And this was actually episode 4. It's called The Worst Heartbreak of My Life, a Red Pill Cautionary Tale. That's episode 4 of the Sharpe Reality. I also wrote about it on Return of Kings in an article titled How Forgetting My Game Almost Ruined My Life. And if you guys want to know more about that, definitely check out that episode on the Sharpe Reality, the podcast, or if you want to read about it, you can go to Return of Kings. Today I'm going to talk about my marriage to a woman who had a slew of red flags and baggage that ultimately ended our relationship. Now, the interesting thing here is that I didn't realize how bad our marriage really was until I had taken the red pill, which was years after we split up. By all accounts, our divorce was really as amicable as it could have been. Okay, we were both broke, we didn't have any children together, and we didn't hate each other, so things ended relatively drama-free, and for me, I'd gotten out clean. She didn't divorce rate me, I didn't have anything for her to take. But looking back through my red pill goggles sort of made me realize that my marriage was rife with red pill confirmations. And again, I didn't realize this at the time, but when you look at things through a red pill lens, things sort of jump out to you. So, like episode 4, when I talked about my relationship with Amy, I'm just going to sort of take you from start to finish to my marriage with who we'll call Darcy, the future ex-Mrs. Sharpe, and hopefully you guys can sort of learn again some of the lessons that I had to learn the hard way. Now, just to let you guys know, I was certainly still a beta blue pill male, but this particular relationship didn't take as much of a toll, not nearly as much of a toll as my relationship with Amy. I certainly loved my wife while I was married to her, but it wasn't the same kind of love that I had for Amy. It was just different. That's just the way it is. Sometimes you love a woman more than another woman. You don't have to be married for her. You don't have to be married to her to love someone more. But I did. And so we'll go ahead and get started. Now, so I met my future ex-wife at a warehouse I was working at in my early 20s. I was 24 years old. And it was cool because it was the very first blue-collar job I'd ever had. Up until that point, I had always worked in retail. I worked at a Halloween Express store for a short time back when I think when I was like 21 or 22. It was in the town that I went to college at. I had always done, telemarketing jobs. I was always in some sort of sales job. But this was the first time I had ever worked at a blue-collar job. So I had my steel-toed boots, hard hats, forklifts, heavy boxes, soggy sandwiches, telling dirty. And this was the cool thing about a blue pill job is that you can be much more liberal with the jokes that you tell. Like, in other words, we didn't really have to worry about HR because most of the people that I worked shoulder to shoulder with were men. We could talk about girls. Oh, this girl had big tits, and yeah, I fucked this girl and dumped that that girl, or, my buddy got divorce raped by his land whale of an ex-wife. Like, we could tell stories like that and not have to worry about it because we're out in the warehouse away from everybody. Nobody was privy to those conversations, and these were everyday blue-collar, rough-and-tumble type of men. And it was quite refreshing. This was kind of cool. This was sort of America at its core. So Darcy first caught my eye when I walked into the shipping office to check on a load. I think it was running late or something. And she didn't really pay me any mind because she was already involved with someone else on another shift. And we'll talk about this a little bit later. So what I decided to do, I knew I wanted to get at her. So I decided to, quote unquote, wait until the opportunity presented itself. In other words, I didn't have any game. If I had any balls, I would have chatted her up. I didn't have any game, so I decided to wait until the opportunity presented itself. Basically, just an excuse not to act on impulse. But listen, she definitely had my attention. Beautiful girl. Again, she was 25 when I met her. I was 24. Pretty face, long curly brown hair, nice big tits. She was probably a solid 8 at that point. So over the first, over the first few months, we started talking, a little bit more because at that point I had gotten a promotion to checker. So I wasn't out on the floor. Like, I was out on the floor most of the time, but part of my new job as a checker involved a lot more interaction with her in the shipping office. And so, a few months later, I found out that her and her boyfriend had parted ways. And I finally said to myself, hey, look, it's now or never. If I don't ask her out, somebody else will, and then I'll be playing the waiting game again. So I'll never forget, we're outside smoking a cigarette, and, again, we're sort of, it's basically small talk at this point. It wasn't anything significant or substantial. It was all just kind of platonic and above board. I didn't know how to escalate, so I just went in for it. I said, hey, Darcy, look, would you like to go out and, have dinner sometime? And she took her cigarette out and she kind of surveyed me, kind of looked me up and down and says, you know what? Yeah, she said, I'd like that. And I was surprised because, again, I didn't have any game. I didn't have any money. I was driving a beat up broken car. She was the prettiest girl that worked there. She was the hottest chick that worked there, or one of the hottest chick that worked there. She could have been with anybody, but for some reason, she decided to go out with me. I didn't know if it's because she was easy, but of course, looking back on it now, again, she was a slut. She was the warehouse slut. She probably was just, she was probably going to date the next guy who asked her out, and that next person happened to be me. So the first date, it was pretty standard, sit down restaurant, conversation about ourselves, what we're looking for in a relationship, etc. Well, during the conversation, she revealed that she lived with her parents, okay? She had a daughter that she didn't currently have custody of, and that her ex-husband used to beat her. She told me, yeah, my ex-husband used to beat me up, like I'm a victim of domestic violence. After that first date, I wanted so badly to be her knight in shining armor and rescue her from the horrible and hard luck life that she led. And again, of course, post-Red Pill Renaissance, this sounds silly, but this is really how I felt. And this is how men are made. When we see that a woman is in any sort of trouble, our provider's instinct sort of kicks in. But in 2016, men know, at least red pill aware men know, that rescuing a damsel in distress is a fool's errand on a lot of different levels. You yourself could get hurt or possibly killed. It could lead to some sort of, again, no good deed goes unpunished, especially when it comes to women. So, but again, this wasn't on my mind. I wanted to rescue her. I wanted to make her mine. So, other than a few minor hiccups, things actually went pretty smoothly, for a couple who had just met. And so a month later, I decided to move her into my place. We worked identical 12-hour shifts. So again, we were around each other 24/7. And one would think that we'd be ready to kill each other and be at each other's throats because we were around each other all the time, but it never happened. We had a few minor hiccups, but other than a short verbal spat here and there, we got along pretty well, and things seemed to be working out. And so 1 year after our 1-year anniversary, I proposed to her, and she accepted. And and it was really cool because we quit our jobs, we put in our 2-week notice, and we got married and we moved to Florida. And we actually eloped. We packed up all our things. She drove like a small Suzuki. We packed everything we could into that Suzuki Grand Vitara. It was a small SUV, and we drove to Dillon, South Carolina, where we went to the Justice of the Peace, paid $288, got our marriage license, and we were Mr. and Mrs. Sharpe. And from there, we moved to a small town right outside of Tampa. Now, for a girl from a small country town in the South, it was kind of like a fairy tale romance. Because here I was broke and I didn't have any game to speak of. I didn't have any money, but I was this different dude that she had met. All of the men that she had ever dated, they were all country boys, didn't really go anywhere, didn't really see much, and she had probably never left the county. But by the time I met her, by the time I was in my mid-20s, I had already lived in 14, 15 different states, and so I had a lot of cool stories to tell, and she sort of saw me as this new, shiny thing. Maybe I can hitch my wagon onto that. My first marriage didn't work out, but this guy seems exciting, he seems to be going places, so let's consolidate on him. And so right after we said our vows at the Dillon in Dillon, South Carolina, we get in the car and she's like, stuff like this doesn't happen to girls like me. She thanked me, told me she loved me. I mean, I really thought I was the luckiest man alive. I said, man, this is like a fairy tale. Like, I rescued this girl from her bad life, and I'm taking her to another place. I'm taking her to Florida. We're going to have fun in the sun. We're going to have a bunch of kids. We're going to live happily ever after. Well, of course, as we all know, that's quite the opposite of what happened. It didn't take long for things to change after we actually got to Florida. Over, I would say, about a 2-week to maybe about a 3-week period, the sex dropped off almost completely. We were fucking, 2-3 times a day when we were dating. But as soon as we tied the knot, the sex was completely cut off. She got bitchy. All of a sudden, it just seemed like we didn't get along as well as we used to. I felt like I was completely blindsided. And again, I'm a 24-year-old kid. I don't know what's what at this point. So I said, all right, well, listen, maybe she just has cold feet. Maybe she's not sure that she really wants to be married. So I'm gonna give her a little bit of space and try to sort of let her feel her way around and get used to being married again. I remember one morning, when I was getting ready for work, and this was a few months down the line, I'd gotten a job, a retail sales job, and I was a little late. I was a little late getting ready for work, and so I asked Darcy to iron my shirt, and she said no. And so I start throwing a fit, like, I'm going to work every day, and you don't have a job, this and that and the other. I threw a fit, tried to tell her to do it, she didn't budge, and so I ended up ironing my shirt. But I was seething. I was pissed. Because in my mind, the least she could do for me was help me to get ready for work, because she didn't have a job. And she wouldn't work for at least another few years. But she would do no such thing. She did not want to iron my shirt. And the reason why is because I wasn't a man. I should have just said, yo, iron my shirt. Had I had red pill knowledge, had I been the man that I am today, she would have done it without question. But it was obvious at that point that I was not the man that I needed to be. And if you're not a real man, women aren't going to treat you like one, including ironing your shirt and taking care of you. So I'm all pissed off. I'm throwing a fit, huffing and puffing. I'm in the kitchen making my coffee when she started bitching and complaining about something. And I took the bait. I was like, you know what, fuck this. So we go back and forth. And after a few minutes, I fucking had it. I let her talk for about maybe 15, 20 seconds. When I finally just erupted, I told her, shut the fuck up. I yelled at her. I had never spoken to her like that before, and as soon as I said it, I was scared. I said, oh shit, man. And my back was turned when I said it. And so I couldn't see her facial expression, nor did I want to, and I waited for her to scream back, and I just knew we were going to get into this knockdown, drag-out war, but she never said anything. She fell silent. She didn't say anything to me until I stormed out the door. And again, I didn't want to appear weak. So I'm still getting ready after, and she's still silent. I'm getting ready. So as soon as I get ready to go out the door to work, she said, "Have a good day at work, Donovan. I love you." I slammed the door and I didn't say shit back. I was still pissed off because in my mind, it was just a pitiful, disingenuous attempt at making up with me for being a complete fucking bitch the entire morning. I was like, you know what? Fuck your apology. Fuck you. I'm out of here. I'm just going to go to fucking work and we'll talk about this when we get back. That was my attitude. And of course, oh, pardon me, guys. I had a bad day at work because I was prepared for the worst when I got home. I cursed at her, slammed the door. I didn't tell her that I loved her when she told me she loved me, so I knew that as soon as I got home, I was in for it. I knew that the argument was probably going to continue. Well, when I got home, to my surprise, like the smell of fresh roasted chicken hit me in the face. And I'm, kind of walking around. The house is clean. Everything is clean. I take off my work clothes. All of my clothes were ironed. And there's Darcy in the kitchen making mashed potatoes and baked chicken. Like there was a chicken in the oven. It was kind of roasting away. And Darcy was a very good cook. And so I go into the living room and on the TV, she turned on baseball. And as soon as I saw that the game was on, I walked back in the kitchen. She offered me a beer, which of course I gladly accepted, but I was still a little apprehensive because she had never acted like this before. But there she was, sort of doing her, just sort of being super wife, being June Cleaver after I'd yelled at her. The whole night, guys, I waited for the other shoe to drop, but it never did, okay? Darcy was on her best behavior that night. She was extremely affectionate. I never had an empty beer in my hand for more than a few seconds. And when the game was finally over, she literally threw herself at me. And dude, I fucked her six ways from Sunday. It was probably the best sex we ever had. Now, this continued for about another week, but I never apologized for yelling at her. Not because I knew that it would constitute as breaking frame, which of course I didn't know at the time, but it was because it was because I was afraid that the great treatment would stop. My blue pill brain thought that she was putting on and waiting for the right opportunity to sort of pull the rug out from under me, and that an apology would give her that chance. I had no idea, guys, that I had actually done the right thing that morning, okay? But my dumbass didn't put two and two together. I thought that Darcy had finally recognized what a great husband I was, realized the error in her ways, and when I yelled at her, she decided to finally shape up and be a good wife. That's what I thought. So I went back to being the nice guy that I thought she was showing appreciation for. Well, little did I know, I'd never get another beer or a blowjob from her, at least not in the same night, for the next half decade, 5, 6, 7 years. The bottom line, guys, is that the red pill stared me right in the face, and I flat out ignored it, thinking that her behavior was sort of an accumulative appreciation of how great a husband I was. Now, this continued on for the next 5, 6 years. Okay, Darcy, she went back to her bitchy ways. And of course, we all know, the better I treated her, the worse she treated me. But instead of exploding on her again, I tamped down my anger and frustration because, again, I didn't realize that was the way that I should have handled it. I tried to express my feelings. I tried to tell her, hey, Darcy, this isn't working. We need to look out for each other. Didn't get me anywhere. I was on the phone with my mom every week telling her this story or that, asking her what I should do, asking her how I should treat. And of course, listen, you can't take relationship advice from other women, even your own mother. My mother gave me the politically correct advice. Well, you have to buy flowers for her. Women want to be cherished, blah, 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 blah. That, of course, got me absolutely nowhere. I tried everything I could to get her to be at least halfway decent to me, but nothing worked. Okay? And again, this continued for the rest of our relationship. The straw that broke the camel's back is when my dad came to town. Now, my dad and I, we didn't have the best relationship. We would go years at a time without talking to one another. But listen, he was still my father. I loved him, and I wanted to bury the hatchet after a few years of not speaking. So, when my sister called and said that, he was at her place, and just to sort of catch you guys up, by now we're back in North Carolina. So my sister called me up and she said, hey, Dad's here and, he's going to be flying out in a few hours and he'd like to see you. So I'm like, okay, great. I finally get to put our feud behind us once and for all. So I go and I get dressed and I'm ready to go. And Darcy, of course, decides to throw another one of her fits. She's storming around the house, trying on a bunch of outfits, bitching about how cold it is outside, complaining that we had to drive an hour. I remember her asking me at one point, well, why can't you just talk to him on the phone? Just being as difficult as she could possibly fucking be. Now, when she was finally ready to go, I knew that it was already too late to see my dad that day. She purposely delayed so that we couldn't go to see my dad. But at that, I was already pissed off, but I figured we may as well go anyway, because my nieces and nephews at least would be a good consolation. But the damage had been done, okay? And the entire drive to my sister's place, I said not a single word to Darcy. This is not the kind of behavior she was used to. I was always being nice to her. I was always trying to make conversation. That was not the case this time. She tried making conversation. She tried offering me cigarettes. She tried apologizing for taking too long. But that was it, guys. I was done. Darcy knew how important this was to me, but she sabotaged it without any regard for how it would affect me. And to this day, I still have no idea why on earth she did that to me. I've never asked her about it. I'll never know why, but I didn't give a shit. I just remember thinking on the way to my sister's house all of the times and ways that this woman had shit on me. I thought about her shitty treatment of me despite my best efforts to please her. The physical sacrifices, the mental sacrifices that I made to provide her as comfortable a life as I could. I was always working 2 jobs. I always had a full-time sales job and then another part-time job. I thought about the time she wanted to do online paralegal school. I paid for that. I thought of the time she wanted to start a little craft business. I helped her with that. I'm up at 5:30 on Sunday mornings to take her stuff to the swap meet or the flea market to sell because she wanted to now be a swap meet vendor. Anything that she wanted to do, I was there and supported her 100%. And still at this point, she still didn't have a job. She was literally just living off of me. But anything I tried, anything I wanted to do, when I wanted to start a business, she always shot it down. If I wanted to do something new or try to better my life in any way, she shot it down. But I was always supporting her. It was a one-way street. There was even a 1-year period, probably a little more than that we didn't even have sex because we were in the process of joining the Catholic Church, and you can't live in sin. And again, all of these things sort of hit me at once. And when she pulled that stunt that she did, when my dad came to town, I decided that I had it. Well, a few months later, I saw my dad, made up with him. So that, that story had a happy ending. My dad and I, we don't really talk that much, but, we buried the hatchet and, that's that. But in the months that followed her sabotage of the visit with my father, she went back to June Cleaver mode. Remember when I yelled at her before work a few years ago and I came home, she's got chicken in the oven and everything is great. She's sucking my dick every night, giving me beers. She went back to doing that. But that only confirmed my decision to end the marriage. I remember I'm on the phone with my mother when I'm telling her that, hey, I'm going to file for divorce with Darcy. I told her I don't want to be with a woman I have to treat like shit to be treated well. Now, gentlemen, that is the embodiment of the quintessential blue pill male. When a man knows that he has to treat a woman like shit in order to be treated well, but he refuses to do so, or refuses to be a pushover, that's when you know it's the end. That's when you know it's time to take the red pill. Unfortunately for me, I didn't discover the red pill at that point, because I still thought that if you treated women well, that they would treat you well in return. I had just picked the wrong one. So, what did I learn? Nothing. Okay, at least not yet. I mean, listen, I was every bit the beta male I was after our divorce was finalized as the day we said our wedding vows. Okay, and again, our divorce was quick, it was uncomplicated, and like I said, in the end, we didn't hate each other. We just kind of chalked it up to the fact that we just weren't right for each other. We said, hey, look, this is nobody's fault, and we're just better off going our separate ways. I remember our divorce took 10 minutes. We went to some window, we filled it out, we said, hey, we want a no-fault divorce. We filled out paperwork, went in front of the judge, basically nodded our heads, and he stamped his little stamp, and we were divorced. We walked down the stairs. We walked to a Starbucks, had a coffee and a sandwich, and said our goodbyes. There were no tears. It was all good. Now, again, though I didn't experience, the anguish that I went through in my breakup with Amy, I'd be lying to you guys if I said I wasn't at least a little bit saddened by our split, because I'd known this woman for the better part, the last 7-8 years. And even though our marriage sucked, and by this point I was balls deep in Amy, at the time, like I'd already started fucking her, but it was still kind of sad. It was still kind of a bummer to see that it had all sort of came to an end after all these years. Now, I'm not going to get into the chronological timeline of my journey and subsequent, discovery, of the red pill, because again, it's well documented on Return of Kings. You guys can certainly check that out. But shortly after discovering the red pill, actually finding Return of Kings and other red pill related sites, Darcy's red flags became as clear as day. The first red flag I mentioned before, she didn't have her daughter. All right, she didn't have custody of her daughter. Now, I didn't think much of this when she revealed this to me on our first date, because again, at this point, I was just happy to be liked by a pretty girl. But her daughter at the time, I think, was like 6 or 7. She was in the custody of her ex-husband, but I never pressed her on the reasons because, I was largely unaware rather, of the court system's bias towards women. So I didn't realize that, hey, I mean, if you're a woman, you don't have custody of your kids, you're a bad fucking mom. And of course, I found out that she didn't have custody of her kids because, of course, red flag number 2, she was a drug addict. During our first month together, she told me she had sort of, quote, dabbled in crystal meth for a while and that the court system, quote unquote, screwed her over. The details were fuzzy, but the bottom line is that I now know that she had to be a fucking terrible mother because, again, women routinely receive favorable outcomes from judges. Even when they're drug addicts, family court judges will still let mothers keep their children. It's a crying shame. Red flag number 3, and this was a big one. Her daughter was a result of paternity fraud. So while she was married, she had an affair with someone else and had that person's kid. And so her ex-husband believes that his, quote, daughter is his biologically, and it is not. And even though I was a blue pill beta at the time, I didn't have to have red pill awareness to know that was fucked up. Another red flag was even before we got together is that I knew she made her rounds at work. Okay, and again, like I told you guys before, I knew that I wasn't the first dude, who had fucked her at our job. But the longer we dated, the more aware that I became of just how many dudes she'd fucked at the warehouse. And again, my coworkers, like, while I was dating her, they told her, hey, look, dude, just wanted to warn you up front, like, this chick's a slut, man. Like, she gets around. My dumbass wifed her up anyway. And of course, that ended up being a bad decision. She had her ex's initials tattooed on her. I asked her to cover it up. She didn't. And of course, the last red flag, I guess, is that it seemed to be too easy to marry her. Listen, back then, I mean, I'm a good-looking guy, okay? But other than that, I didn't have anything going for me, guys. I didn't have any game. I didn't have any money. I didn't have anything. I was just another forklift driver making $13 an hour. Yet, she offered no resistance to moving in with me, which was a huge step for any relationship that's barely a month old, and she didn't object to marry me when I popped the question, just a year after we started dating, okay? But looking back, it's now pretty obvious that, look, here's the deal. The red pill truth is this. She was closing in on the wall, guys. Okay, she was 26 when I married her, so she knew that at some point the party was going to be over. And she needed a sucker who was unaware of her past or unaware that her past made her damaged goods. so that they would wife her up and sort of, give her a good life. Or found, again, she was looking for someone who could sort of overlook her past. Girls do that trickle truth. And when after revealing this to me and seeing that I would still stick around despite her drug habit, despite all of these red flags that she revealed to me and that I knew, she knew that she had her sucker. She said, okay, yeah, if this guy proposes, I'm definitely going to say yeah. And of course I did it. I guess to sort of wrap this up, like I said before, guys, I had always thought that my marriage to Darcy wasn't all that bad. But the moment I discovered the manosphere, all of that changed, okay? The bottom line is that marrying a divorced drug addict, okay, who had committed to paternity fraud in her last marriage, that's on me. We can all sit here and talk shit. Oh, she was a slut. No. And again, I'm not trying to absolve her of any of her bad decisions, but I don't hold that against her. Again, that's on me. These are red flags that stared me in the face as clear as day, yet I ignored it and married her anyway. And again, I can chalk that up to the fact that I was a blue pill beta, but I'll give myself sort of a pass for that. I'm glad that again I didn't suffer any financial or emotional collateral damage or anything like that. But again, at the end of the day, you still have to reach down and grab your Y chromosome. And we all know, hey, if I knew then what I knew now, then I wouldn't have done X, Y, or Z. I'm very, very fortunate that things could have, and at the time, she couldn't have any kids. After she had her first kid, her first husband was in the military. After she had her first kid, she got on birth control, and I guess it fucked up her reproductive system somehow. And she was unable to have kids at that point. So in 7 years of having unprotected sex with my wife, she never got pregnant again. Or she never got pregnant, so that was good. As far as Darcy is concerned, she seems to be doing okay for herself. Her brother and I, we're still cool, so we still talk from time to time. Husband, she managed to find another husband. This guy, he's a certified public accountant or something, makes great money. The only catch is that this dude had 5 kids, okay? So Darcy ended up getting picked up, and this was a guy who had a major crush on her in high school. And again, this was it's so funny, it's so poetic how this happened. There was this dude at her high school who had this crush on her. But he was this egg-headed nerd. And of course, Darcy's making the rounds. Making the rounds at school. She's slutting it up around school. She slutted it up in college. She ends up working at a warehouse back in her, podunk hometown. She's fucking a bunch of dudes at the warehouse. She's married twice, has a kid. She commits paternity fraud, has a kid out of wedlock. And now she's back in her hometown, divorced, now for the second time. And here is this guy now who has 5 kids of his own. But he's like, hey, you know what? The queen of XYZ County is now available. I'm sure, he felt like the luckiest guy in the world. But listen, I don't know what their relationship is like. I don't care. But all I know is that she's out of my hair. And, I'm sure she's having the time of her life, raising those 5 kids. Now, people may think, well, I'd never be so stupid as to put a ring on, a woman like that. Like, I'd never do that. But like I said, guys, hindsight is always 20/20. And at the end of the day, I'm just glad that I didn't have a pound of flesh for her to take. That concludes this episode of The Sharpe Reality. Again, follow me at Donovan_Sharpe. Like my Facebook page, The Sharpe Reality. Again, go to thesharpereality.com. There you can check out previous podcast episodes. And also check out my articles on Return of Kings. Just do a quick search for Donovan Sharpe, and my archive of 80-plus articles will come up. Also, be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel. And again, there you'll find all of my podcast episodes. I actually just started that YouTube channel, so definitely check that out. If you have YouTube, if it's easier for you to listen on that, definitely subscribe to that as well. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Sharpe Reality, and I will talk to you guys next Tuesday.